supremacy is something that should stop. We say there should never be another Breonna Taylor. There should never be another George Floyd. Under opposition, we are going to solve the problem right to its core, resulting in a far more better policy and a far more solving within the crimes within the society itself. We concede that, sure, under opposition, our approach is a far more radical thing compared to government, but if we are able to prove to you that under our side, it is going to be more effective, then opposition deserves to champion this debate, right? What am I going to talk about in my speech? I'm going to bring you 3 arguments in this debate. Number 1, on the principle basis, why it is morally justified for us to cut police defunding. Secondly, I'm also going to give you a trade-off, why under our side of the house, it is okay to sacrifice some things. But lastly, I'm also going to give you benefits under opposition, what is going to happen, and why our side of the house will result in so much better police department, right? But before that, what is our model in this debate? It is very simple. We're going to defund the police funding, and then we're going to allocate it into social services, to your services to education, as what the motion says. We think that this is a far more effective model to begin with, hence we are so proud to oppose this motion. Moving on to my first principle and my first argument in this debate, why it is morally justified to cut policy funding. I'm going to answer this in 2 layers, or 2 structural reasons, right? Number 1, the problem within policy systematically. What you have to notice here is that the whole principle of Prime Minister is to say that it is not fair for you to cut off policy funding because one bad policy does not mean the whole police department is bad. That there is still good policy to begin with, and it doesn't mean that one bad policy is going to reflect the whole police department, for example. But we say that the problem of racism that exists in the police department itself is because it exists in the whole department systematically. There has been proofs why on cases that was proposed by people that is not white, it will take longer to be taken. This looks like on the cases of George Floyd, it took you a week or even more. It took you so much protest within the society, and if maybe the black people or even the black supporter is not going to go support, there will be no cases, or there will be no one to be taken accountability, right? It took so long for the police to be held accountable under the case of George Floyd. This means that even if under government reformation happens, there will be no change whatsoever, because even if you're going to fire your police that is racist in the very first place, and you're going to recruit another police that maybe you think that they're not racist, if the narrative and if the systematical error that exists under police department is not vanished yet, it means that there will be no change whatsoever, because the racist narratives and the systematic fault still exist. So we think that there will be no significant changes. Police will still discriminate non-white people, and they will not effectively solve cases that involve non-white supremacy anyway at the end of the day. Secondly, why we think that this is morally justified? Because this is a trigger for police to not be racist, right? Because under government side of the house, they say, oh, racial and sexism can be unlearned, right? They say that there will be, for example, seminars or even socialism within this topic. But under that logic, then why the case of George Floyd still happens? Because if that is really true and effective, I think that George Floyd or even Breonna Taylor are going to be killed, or they're not going to be discriminated by the police. Right? We question the effectiveness under that solution given by Prime Minister. The reason why police are racist is under 2 layers. Number 1, because systematical fault in their department still exists even until this day. But secondly, there is no trigger for them to be less racist. We need a drastic punch for these police to abolish their bad conduct in the very first place. Under government, there is no trigger whatsoever because they are just going to reform, right? But also, this is why we will defund the police. This means that under our side of the house, we will have the exclusivity that government can never conduct in this debate, and that is I'm going to answer that in 2 layers. Number 1, they have no choice but to change their behavior, right? Because they know that if I do something that is bad, all of them is going to be, for example, the police department is going to get their defund taken. But also by defunding, reform would also happen under our side of the house, right? This is why Prime Minister's benefit is not exclusive under the side of the house. But what differentiates us what differentiates our reformment, it is going to be far more better, because they know once they conduct a bad job, the whole department is going to be cut off. A lot of people is also going to be fired, for example, or they're going to get less and less facility to begin with. But also, we think that this is going to be taken to accountability under the reasons that these people will most likely be more faster to conduct or to be held accountable when they do a bad job, right? Because their action affects the whole police department to begin with. So it is far more easier for us to know actually what happens, or even who is doing that in the very first place. Moving on to my second argument on the trade-off. Sure, we concede under our side of the house, there will be less police to maintain peace in high criminal rate areas, right? But this is okay under 3 layers. Why? Number 1, even under the side of the house where police are not defunded, I think that criminal still happens anyway. Those people who police in Texas or Mexico, for example, are still facing drugs, cartel, or even sexism, or even rapists to begin with. So even if their proposal is that good to begin with, we question the likelihood on how exactly criminal rates will go down. But secondly, taking the worst scenario, if it really is that bad, right? I think that this trade-off is worth it under the layers. Why? Because under our state of the house, because there is less police, less chances of them to strike off, and they have to finish every problem at the moment to the core to also solve another proposal or crime. This means that under our state of the house, even if we're going to reform or even cut down the defunding, that is still completely okay, right? But lastly, at the very least, even if there is taking the worst case scenario, right? Under our state of the house, police would not have systematical error, for example. And under our state of the house, we are also going to have police that is going to do their work far more better, and they will not have any misconduct unlike under government side of the house, right? Moving on to my third and last argument in this debate on the benefit point on why under the side of the house it is going to be far more better than opposition. Under the side of the house, police is not going to be better, but instead under our side of the house you're going to get a policy that is much more better under the layers. Why? They are going to be better at solving crimes, but secondly, this eliminates of the bad behavior or the bad narrative or the bad systematical error that exists under the state of the house. But secondly, fundings that we allocate will result into a bigger involvement of people and bigger movement anyway. Why? Because now Black Lives Matter movements have funding, and they will have more facility to begin with. For example, under our state of the house, we are also going to have another benefit or even more exclusive benefit that is going to only exist under our state of the house, because under the state of the house there is no funding towards Black Lives Matter movement, for example, or there is no funding for youth education, right? But also on the last point, why under the state of the house benefit that we are going to have is far more better, because on the point of education we are able to educate young people to stop the white supremacy, which eliminates racist environment. This is why Prime Minister case falls, because they talk to you, oh, the reason why these people are racist is because their environment to begin with. Then sure, if that is the case, how exactly that under the state of the house, by reforming only the police, then you can cater all of those people who is racist by being racist, for example. We question that under the state of the house, right? Under our state of the house, individual is not going to grow in the racist environment. Why? Because your parents, for example, or because your children in the very first place have to be educated, and there will be curriculum, for example, that we should stop the white supremacy, that you should still respect Asians, for example, or you should still have Latinos as your friend. And we think that even under our state of the house, we are going to be even more better far under opposition, right? If Prime Minister case of benefit falls, because under our state of the house we also have community involvement, right? But in the far more bigger scale. Why? Because under our state of the house we are still going to have involvement of community, in which, for example, Black Lives Matter, but even with bigger magnitude, because we still have funding. But secondly, under our state of the house we eliminate all the causes of you being racist. So not only that we are going to eliminate the police being racist, but we also eliminate future racist people, for example. Hence why we are so proud to oppose.